The first time you were on this podcast was the first time you and I had a conversation. Crazy to think that now, but 18 months ago, we'd never spoken apart from exchanged a few emails. You come on to this show with some random British podcast that you've never heard of, and we have a great conversation, and that leads to the book. Now, I knew within 10 minutes of speaking with you that I wanted to write your book. It was just, I knew immediately that connection we had and the story you were telling was too good to be consigned to short conversations that needed to be told in full. How does it feel having come out the other side of what's been a very long process we went through and a very hard process at times we went through to write this book? How does it feel that it's out in the world now and also being enjoyed by readers?
I just got a beautiful message today about someone that just finished the book and just was just go over the moon with it, and how it inspired them, and maybe something they were going through was in the book that they really needed to read or see here. And I remember your enthusiasm when you first talked to me about writing my story. I was like, I've always wanted, I wrote a book 14 years ago, How to Be the Happiest Person on the Planet, but I never wrote my story. And when you said that to me and seeing the enthusiasm in you was like, man, this, if I'm ever going to write a book, or if anybody out there is going to write a book, man, talk to Ben Veal, because the excitement you had writing this book and the hours that were put in. I mean, we did so many Zoom calls and talked for hours to get this book up and running and hearing my stories. But, one thing is telling somebody your story, but then having them take that story and bringing it to life is a whole different thing. And that's where a great writer comes in. And Ben, you took my stories and you made them as real as they were in my life. And I couldn't have been happier to write this book with you. We had our moments. I mean, there was laughter, tears, and everything in between in the process of writing this book. And we had a lot of fun and became great friends and obviously meeting in person and spending time together, but, when you look at the book that we wrote together, it's a pretty thick book. I mean, there's a lot in this book, and it's my story, and it's finally out there, and it'll be out there forever. And both of us wanted to make a difference. And that was the biggest thing about me wanting to write this book with you, is that you also felt how I felt. Let's make this book special, not just about wrestling. Let's make it about life. And that's what I love about this book.
And another thing that was a real joy for me going through it was the ability to connect with people from your life who, at various points you've had great relationships with, some of whom you'd lost touch with, and to reconnect with them. But everyone from Clarence Santini, he was Little Richard's driver, to speaking with your brother Joel, to speaking with Eric Watts, right through to Vince Russo and Mick Foley and DDP and Lex Luger, Eric Bischoff. I'm not sure who else I've missed off, but so many people. As soon as I sent an email and said, Marc Mero, that was all we needed to hear. It was instantly, yes, of course, what you need. One of the people is obviously Eric Bischoff. Now, you two hadn't spoken for almost 30 years. In between those times, since 1996 when you left WCW, that was the last time you'd really had a conversation. But I knew that Eric was, a big fan of what you've done post wrestling. I'd listened to a special he did in 83 Weeks talking about your post wrestling journey, and I mean, he couldn't say enough good things about you. I know you recently did 83 Weeks with Eric, and then you got to meet him at a convention in New Jersey. What's it been like to reconnect with Eric, who obviously at one point was such a close friend to you?
I think it's amazing that when you look at life and you look at maybe someone you had a disagreement with, but before our disagreement of me leaving WCW to go to WWE, we were always very close. I mean, I remember taking his kids to Six Flags with my daughter, and we were close as a family. And then, of course, when I left, there was, I guess hard feelings on both our parts in a sense, but never really talking to each other over all those years. And then reconciled because of my book, actually, and if it wasn't for writing this book, and it wasn't like we were saying bad things about each other or anything. It's just that you lost touch, and then reconciling, and not only reconciling, but having him write some nice things about me in the book, but also meeting in person for the first time in all those years and having a great time. I mean, it was like we just picked up for when we were back in our 30s, like 30 years ago, of how it was back then. And it's all about, I don't know, it's just, you can't live with bitterness, resentment, or unforgiveness. It's a cancer that destroys you. And I've learned so much. It's like wrestlers, when I go to these conventions and I see wrestlers that maybe we didn't get along or we didn't talk much or maybe didn't even like back then. Man, it's like I just walk up to them and, man, open arms, big hug. There's no bitterness. We did something that most people will never, ever do. This camaraderie that we all have is like it's just a joy to have this with somebody that you did something so incredible. Who cares about what happened 20, 30, 40 years ago? It's amazing. But I think many wrestlers feel like that because many wrestling conventions are so much fun because we get to see each other, guys you work with, guys you worked against, friends, foes, and it all just becomes a big family.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I still have bizarre memories of being in a taxi with you, Ken Shamrock, Shelton Benjamin, and Al Snow last year. Like the wacky brotherhood that is wrestling. You never know who you're going to bump into at a
Yes.
convention.